Hey everyone, Sid here from One Pal again. Um, this week, what we thought we'd focus on is parents and some of the concerns that they might have about mental health. And so we have with us Ajay, who's a marriage and family therapist in Minneapolis.
Hi, Sid. Yeah, thanks for having me today. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to answer some of our questions. Um, so just right off the bat. So if, say, as a parent, you think that your child might be struggling with mental health, what steps should you take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. That's always a great question in like South Asian culture with stigmas and things, especially at this time with things going on with the recent suicide by the actor over there in India in Bollywood. Um, I think that um, having that awareness, to be honest, is probably one of the biggest things you can do, and seeing it for that and not for something else. So a big part of I think, the barrier that a lot of parents may have in general, a lot of minority cultures we see this, but I think especially traditional, like for me, I've got family roots in India and Pakistan, and my parents were both born there. There is a lot that can then occur that it mental health issues are treated as a pretty big stigma. So realizing that just like anything else, just like relating it to maybe other things that they may see, that just like they maybe encourage a lot of education or practice in other areas, this is just another area of practice. And once they get to that point, then I think reaching out, talking with their kids about it, and from a young age, and saying how big and how important mental health is for happiness in life, and setting them up with a therapist. Because I think it's one of those things that, just like we would get a tutor in a subject, or athletes have personal trainers, it's just another facet to just to have, and to reach out to. And I think with that, maybe finding someone that's like culturally competent as well, to be helpful, that understands those specific issues.
So I'm glad that you brought up therapy and therapists in general. And I'm sure a lot of parents have some questions about what that would be like as well. So just right off the bat, like, could you explain a little bit about what is therapy like? Who should go to therapy? Are there is it what we see on TV and the movies with a therapist and you lie down on the couch? Uh, so tell us a little bit about like who should go. What's it like?
Yeah, totally. You see me smiling and laughing here because I'm like, that's like the furthest thing of what it's like, especially that stereotype of like laying on the couch. It's such a like, I feel like such an impersonal, like stigmatizing thing, that scene, and that is actually a specific type of therapy. So that is something that occurs, but it's not what most people experience when they go to see a therapist nowadays, in general. So I would say, as far as who goes to therapy and why is it helpful, and those kinds of questions, like I think everyone does from different ages, and people go for all sorts of reasons. A lot of times, if you've got younger people going, it could be in response to a sort of a trauma or a stress, or divorce in the family as well. But I think we just have to go as far, if we're talking about the DSM and stuff, and reasons that people get diagnoses, which there's arguments around that too, because it's like any other system that occurs. It's like, it's very confining, because a lot of people, it's very stigmatizing even to use that. That's a part of the problem that keeps people from even coming. A lot of these issues that people go to therapy for are just normal human things. Like, people struggle with anxiety. Anxiety is like one of the most common diagnoses out there. Depression, like, and the thing that is often not looked into place is the things and the reasons why that happens. And certain therapists are like more able to work with that than others. But looking at the factors, if you've got someone that comes from another country, and they had an arranged marriage, and they left their home culture, and then they had kids, there's only so much they're going to be able to help their children with, or their young adult kids with. And so it can be helpful for them. It can be helpful for their kids in transitioning and understanding things, and the struggles of being, living between cultures, in this way. Um, so really the answer, and there's also specific disorders, there's things with ADHD as well, autism, and being curious about why things are happening. So I think anyone with an open mind, you've got people that are like, probably like Fortune 500 companies, or people that are just always wanting to improve. Like I said, it's just a form of self-improvement. So anyone can really go. The reason why it's helpful is for that reason, right? It's this space, this non-judgmental space, and ideally it should be. So I always encourage people, like with therapy, I think it's something like 30%, research shows 30% of success in therapy is related to the fit of the client and the therapist. And so, and that's not a knock on the therapist at all. It's like any other relationship. So certain therapists can be better fits for others. So it's about finding that right fit um, in general. And so it can help people get through hard times in life or get to the next place, transitions. That's why we've got therapists for all sorts of things, psychologists as well, which goes into some of the different types of therapy too. Did you ask that already? I'm sorry.
Uh, no, you can go ahead. What are the different types?
Um, so yeah, some of the different types of therapy are, it has to do with, so licenses are one of the things. So based on what your training is going to dictate your license, and that's where you go. So like social workers, very social justice oriented, which that can be in any field, but that's going to be different from an LPC counselor, which is like an individual counselor, versus someone that specializes in drug and alcohol therapy, versus a marriage and family therapist, which is really just a systemic thinking therapist, which is what I do. My field is, and then you've got sex therapy as well, and all these things. And then within those are just the licenses, and then you've got psychologists who are really trained to specialize in assessing and giving exams. They're really trained in that, and then psychiatrists, which they're the ones that give out the medication, is basically what their specialty is. That's why they go to medical school. But within there's all sorts of models, like like certain ones are more research based and used in lots of fields, like DBT. Other ones are specific to fields, like marriage and family therapists use fields, like things that are called like narrative therapy, which is based on really seeing the client as the expert, and how our lives really have these narratives, these stories, and looking for like these outside exceptions or outliers in those events, and working with the clients in really a way where they're the expert. So therapy isn't about the therapist being an expert. And oftentimes some of the most successful therapy, depending on the model you're going from, is based on really working collaboratively with the client.
I mean, it seems like there's something for everybody, which is great. Uh, but I know that some people would still have would be a little apprehensive. Like you mentioned, the stigma as one. There's also, I'm sure there's some barriers like resources and just the sheer cost, right? Um, and so one question that I also have is, um, aside from therapy, well, what's something that just short of that but could still be a little helpful to people's mental health, especially say a parent that could encourage their child to do something?
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, speaking to the barriers, if I can say a little bit about that too, and then also certainly there's lots of resources. It's about if families have access to insurance. They don't often know, like with Medicaid and stuff, often in certain states, and I think Medicaid is nationwide if I'm not mistaken, but therapy can be free, for some people, or very low cost. And even otherwise, there's situations where most therapists will either do a sliding scale, although they'll have like a reduced rate reserved for a certain number of spots for clients, so that that amount is similar to what a copay could be. I mean, it still might be expensive for a lot of people. That might be $70 or $80, but with copays and stuff, it can be less than that oftentimes, just depending. So it's always good to find out. And then as far as other things, well, there's so many things. I mean, anything from, just any sort of self-care exercises, whether it's like journaling, finding things that really help a person be grounded with awareness, whether it's like certain kinds of meditation or chakra music, going for walks, or exercise that a person has, or hobbies. I think having community and space is also another thing. So having friends that people can talk with and connect with, that they really feel that trust, where they can talk about their mental health or everything, just how they're doing, and check in about all the things in a non-judgmental way. So those are just examples of a few of the things that people can do.
Cool. And regarding the stigma, so I imagine just like for physical health, people rely on something like HIPAA to keep that as something that only their medical record only stays between them and their physician and perhaps their insurance company. So does something similar like that also exist, some sort of confidentiality?
Yeah, absolutely. Therapists are bound by HIPAA, particularly licensed therapists. So that's like one advantage of seeing someone that's a licensed therapist or that's on that track, that's a part of an organization like that, versus someone if they're simply doing like, and I don't want to speak too much. I'm certainly not speaking down to this field. I'm just speaking of like the difference of like life coaching. A lot of people will go into those fields and still have a master's degree, but they'll just decide to go the not licensed route. So I don't know how that works around HIPAA, but for our field, confidentiality is huge. It's one of the biggest things that creates a safe space. The things that are shared with a therapist, to a therapist from a client, is stayed, strictly within those within that relationship. The only exceptions are harm. Whether it's harm that a client may be doing to themselves or another person. And I want to be clear about that too, because I think there's a lot of people that maybe they've thought about suicide or suicide ideation, which is basically that thought of like imagining what it would be like to be dead or to commit suicide, but without actually having a plan. Like it's difference between having that thought, which I think is a completely normal thing. So many humans have that at different phases of their life. And for a lot of people, it can be actually very empowering to have that when life feels uncontrollable. And so working with clients in a way that realizes like, yes, this is a safe space to talk about that, but just for them to know if there's obviously an actual plan to do that, or if a therapist thinks they're actually at risk of doing it, that they do have to report them. But a therapist generally is trained to know the difference between the two. So it's probably one of the safest places to actually talk about that. And that includes even self-harm. I have clients that have self-harm, meaning use cutting as a form of self-relief. And that's completely different from, someone that may actually want to cut themselves to harm themselves to actually, I guess trigger warning, like slit their wrist basically, but confidentiality is huge. And even when you come in as couples and families, confidentiality is still a part of it. So it's very important to say the least.
And I know you've touched a little bit on what parents can do for kids. Now, what is something that say parents could do for themselves? Um, Again, that this could be both to see a therapist, like if parents themselves see a therapist, or something else, short of that as well.
Yeah, I think obviously seeing a therapist and one that they feel comfortable around culturally. Like if a brown person, if a South Asian person goes to see a white therapist, there's chances. I think it's important to be aware of whether or not they're culturally competent or not. So if you can find someone with similar racial backgrounds, which I understand that limits the options, but just keeping that as an idea that you want to make sure within like the first session or so that that's something that the therapist is comfortable, that you don't feel any bias towards them, towards your own people from your own culture. But shy of that, I think also some self-reflection. And one of the best ways to do that is honestly reading literature and learning. So like picking up some books. People call it like, like self-help books. And I shouldn't even use the quotation fingers because they are self-help books. But there's just so many books on so many different topics. I think just, finding one, going on Goodreads or Amazon or looking at some book lists, regardless of what the topic is like, and learn about, mental health and really whether that, I mean, there's books specifically on depression and anxiety, and just reading those could be really important, I think, just keeping an open mind by
Right.
consuming literature and being teachable.
Yeah. Seems simple, but it's of course something that we have to be a little mindful and thoughtful of. So since we're nearly out of time, is there any like final thought that you'd like to have specifically for parents that are interested in the space of mental health, either for themselves or for others?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is right. Most of the things in life, right, that are the, really simple like that are effective, they're really hard to do. They're simple but not easy kind of thing. Um, so I think, parents show themselves grace in that process. I think the only other things as far as parents is realizing that in families, there's going to be a lot of systemic issues that are passed on from generation to generation that contribute to broader mental health, and keeping an awareness of that. And a lot of times in certain cultures, in South Asian cultures, some of it may come across as like pointing fingers outwards, and this happens in all cultures too. But I'm just speaking to what I know in this case, and giving the context of the group here. But like pointing fingers instead of looking inwards, and realizing like how that might show up, and the dynamics of like arranged marriages, gender power dynamics, where in South Asian cultures it may be really strong to have patriarchal gender roles, and how that might affect mental health of like cisgender people or heterosexual relationships for the woman, to feel really there is like an expected role that I think kind of shows up in that. And also looking at how that might change from generation to generation too, and how there might be some of the mental health issues may even come from those things, where the children may not want to follow those aspects, and there may be an expectation for that to happen as well. And I say, just keep for people to find resources like your group here, like One Pal as well, just like um, to have these resources available, because there isn't a lot of literature specifically in groups that are creating content that I'm aware of, for South Asian cultures made by people from within those races and cultures. So consuming that and asking questions and starting to have those conversations within their own communities, talking to each other is probably one of the best things, and letting go of this idea of, what will people think of us, if we go see a therapist, if they find out.
Yeah, you got that right. The log kya kahenge, as we
Yeah,
say in Hindi.
yeah, exactly. Very familiar with that. I think every South Asian, a lot of South Asians in Hindi, would smile to that, relating.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to answer some of these questions. I I certainly found it pretty helpful, learning about all the different the menu of therapy out there, and how it's actually rather easy to get involved in your own mental health. So thank you so much for shedding some light on this, and we hope to see you around soon.